Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. It depends on wherever you are in this world. Um, um, to our Homer Book Lunch and Launch and Lunch series. My name is Azza, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Humanities in Africa. And yeah, I get a lot of questions about why is it called a book lunch, like why is it a typo? And I was like, okay, no, it's not a typo, but it's actually a seminar that we used to have during lunchtime, in Homo. It used to happen during lunchtime. And yes, just in hope that one day we could meet again, in physical and have lunch together and discuss books, we decided to keep the name. Yeah, today's book is titled Surfacing on Being Black and Feminist in South Africa, which is published this year by the university, by Wits University Press. And the book is the first collection of essays dedicated to contemporary Black South African feminist perspectives. It's edited by the leading feminist theorist Desiree Lewis, who we all know, and like her work is exceeding her name, who is a for those who don't know her, she's a professor at the Women and Gender Studies Department at the University of Western Cape. And we also have today the co-author or the co-editor and the poet, well-known poet, I hear some people call you Gabeba, some people call you Habiba, but I think I'll go and pronounce it with my Arabic, and I will say Habiba. Habiba Baderoon. Welcome. So Habiba Baderoon is also a co-director of the African Feminist Initiative at Pennsylvania State University, where she is an associate professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies and African studies. So please, for more, if you want to know more about the works of Habiba and Desiree, please go to our Huba webpage. You will have like an extended biography, and also with a lot of exciting works that I basically would love to read all of them. Yeah. It's a pleasure to have you here, Habiba, but I have to disclaim, unfortunately, Desiree is not going to be with us today, but we hope that you, Habiba, are going to echo her voice in this seminar. Yes, I can imagine it's a really a huge task, but we know that you will manage. Once again, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Azza, for the warm welcome to that space. And I also, like you, hope for one day the power of our longing will bring that day closer when we are in the same rooms
Yeah.
again. Thank you very much to Yuma for the invitation to the book lunch and for the opportunity to talk about surfacing again. I desperately miss Desiree for this occasion, but will indeed try to compensate a little bit for her absence. I will say some words about the book and hopefully also have a discussion. In case you're wondering what this rather forthright pile of books is doing, I always keep my local African feminist books as an amulet for good things to happen. So um, I want to say the first thing about this book, Surfacing on Being Black and Feminist in South Africa, is that it's a visionary book, a book of vision, a book of dreaming, a book of imagining. And those of you who have read it will know it is also a book of great craft and artistry in its writing. It is a book indeed of many levels of pleasure. And if only for that, I recommend it highly as the kind of book one becomes enchanted with, as well as learns from, as well as finds educational. So there are multiple dimensions to this book. Another important matter to say about it is that it sees itself as an intervention and a contribution to many facets of contemporary South Africa and indeed of the continent and the world. In a national conversation, you will note that the post 1994 period has been one in which certain dimensions of the literary culture and the political culture have truly changed. And one measure of this is that indeed it is no longer as it used to be when I was younger, an unusual matter that a vision of the present and a vision of the future is pronounced upon by Black commentators. However, what both Desiree and I were struck by is how gendered this commentariat is. Those who get to prognosticate on the future, those who get to pronounce on the present, tend still to be men. And the absence of Black women from this arena of the literary and the political culture was something that we definitely wanted to intervene in. We felt this erasure was too pronounced and too common. And also, it was missing, obviously, the important dimensions that women intellectuals could bring. So, yes, it is true that women have been welcomed into the publishing arena, but we find still that they tend to be concentrated in areas of fiction and my own area, creative writing. And
Excuse me, Habiba, sorry, there are some people writing in the chat. They say that your voice is very low and they can't hear you very well.
okay,
So, yes.
let
Yeah.
me turn up my sound. Okay, apologies about
Okay.
that. I'll also come closer to my microphone. Um, is this better? I hope so. Uh, what I was saying is that women's output in this political sphere and in the literary sphere has been in the arenas of fiction, autobiography, and creative writing more generally. And this has meant that in the space of analysis, philosophy, theorizing, it tends to be still that women are a subordinate group, not present in the numbers that is called upon, and therefore occupying spaces and creating spaces where the analysis that Black feminist women bring are nonetheless heard, but it's not in the spaces of publication, certainly not to the proportion that we notice that Black men are included. So that national conversation is one important space in which we think that surfacing makes a contribution. There is also a continental conversation. Um, some of you will have had the experience of reading really good honors, masters, and PhD dissertations and going through the literary analysis and finding that the review contains a really fine reading of Black feminist thought, but not that from the southern part of the continent. Most commonly, when Black feminist thought is cited in the dissertations or the thesis, it is bell hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, and the great figures of Black feminism in the US, and sometimes as well in the Caribbean, in Britain, in a very small way in Germany, and then more commonly as well from some parts of West Africa, Ghana, and Nigeria particularly. But Southern African women remain remarkably silenced in what is conceived of as Black feminism globally. And this was as well due to a number of factors having to do with large structures and that we felt would be sustained unless we made a strong intervention in this. And so it is really in a non-provincial way to draw attention to this region of Africa, which tends to be underemphasized in global discussions about Black feminism. We also, of course, want to contribute to a really fascinating and important development, which is not new, and that is about African publishing. Um, I myself am based in a United States university, and some of my publications are indeed published in very expensive journals behind paywalls in the North. Mm, More than half of my publications actually are in South Africa, particularly, and in Southern publications more generally. And that is important because first of all, it means that, as Bibi Bakari Yusuf says, Africans need to own the means of production as well as the content of our thought. And so she, as the founder and head of Cassava Republic Press, is an important figure in correcting the imbalance in which what I was describing, where African intellectuals then further enhance the reach and the power of northern publication venues, but then which remain inaccessible largely to um, audiences on the continent. So again, publishing on the continent and ensuring its distribution pan-continentally, which is something that South African presses struggle with, as do other presses in other parts of the continent, because there are problems of distribution in terms of our pan-continental reach. So we also speak a little bit in the introduction that there is a strange way in which Black South African women are very present, both in continental discussions and global discussions of Black feminism. But that is as content, as material, sometimes even as icons, as we know through the figures of Sarah Baartman and Winnie Mandela. So we want to look at that phenomenon and see the ways in which certain South African figures become very flexible icons that are used to speak about conditions elsewhere, and yet the bountiful and not only venerable older scholarship about people like Mandela and Baartman, but really new, very stimulating, very important work has also been neglected. So we start off the book by presenting the newer work that is being done and some of the contested and vibrant and again very important debates that surround such figures and others in contemporary South Africa. So that also was an important dimension. I should say that making this ambitious set of claims, of course, also is matched by our humility about this task. We do not remotely claim that these 20 superb essays are written by the most important Black feminists in South Africa, or a comprehensive survey of Black feminism in South Africa, or a history of Black feminism in South Africa. These are all massive tasks which have indeed been neglected, but cannot possibly be corrected in just one book. So if anything, we see it as an indication of the scale of the need for more work in this area. And there are many writers we really wished we could have included, and some of them were not able to. And then we were many writers whom we absolutely would love to have published, and they could, and they are in the book. So it's a beginning, but a really substantial beginning, a beginning I'm very proud about. So what else can I say? Perhaps a little bit about the range of contributions. You will note that the book divides itself into 4 sections, one of which is the introductory section, and then the unmaking, positioning, and remaking sections. And each of these has contributions that are completely unique. Some of them I would draw attention to by the writer Yewande Omotoso on what it is like to be an author who receives very um, engaged feedback from readers to the extent that the line between what constitutes a response and what constitutes a demand becomes part of her deliberation. I love Danai Mupotsa's Breathing Underwater because it is such a beautiful articulation of the personal essay written in poetic form and speaking about large as well as intimate matters. And then the last section, remaking, just to show you the breadth of its vision for an African future, it includes both the earth and the orgasm and the relations among one another. So the scope of what we write about when we envision the future is something that I think envisions one that has not been imagined before. It speaks in a mode that has not yet been dreamt of, to quote Zoe Wickham, who is in the beginning of the book. And to quote Patricia McFadden, who is at the end of the book, what tomorrow looks like depends on what we think about it today and what we do about it. And I think that this book is a contribution for thinking anew, for thinking in visionary ways and bold ways about what an African future might look like if women's perspectives were taken into account. So I think that's probably enough of me speaking about the book, and I really look forward to having your responses and perhaps your questions, some necessarily critical ones and some others as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Habiba, for your like very over the overview you gave us about the book. Of course, there's a lot of questions the book raised, and but I see there's some of the authors of the articles we have today in the room, and and it would be nice to also to hear from them, and their contributions. So please,
I would love that.
yes.
I'm so glad. I was hoping that would happen when Desiree was unable to make it. I thought, let's have a gathering. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
So um, there's an okay. Um, well, I mean, until okay. Okay. Mm, okay, then fine. I mean, we will wait to
Shall I
people
say another?
gather.
Hmm. I can
Yeah.
say another little thing. One
Okay,
thing that's
please.
very precious to me is what this book manifests and asserts about national belonging. This book
Go back to the other one.
manifests, this book asserts about national belonging. This book.
Go back to the other one.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's okay. So the title is on being Black and feminist in South Africa, and the book includes people whom you might legitimately ask, why are they included? If they're Kenyan, if they're Zimbabwean, if they're from Eswatini, why are such authors in a book that titles itself South African? And our answer to this is that the way that the book envisions and we envision a belonging to a space is by how you bear its debates, by how you bear its difficulties, by how you contribute to its vision. The authors here, um, some of whom make up the backbone of the book, some of whom make up the conclusion of the book, we cannot envision a South African feminism without them being present. And so our definition of South African had to accommodate this reality far beyond simplistic legalistic definitions, and definitely beyond nationalistic definitions, which already scholars like Patricia McFadden have written about, for its really damaging impact on the way that feminism has manifested itself in the past in, unfortunately, nationalistic terms. And we want to move far from this. And I think, to me, it is one of the most beautiful dimensions of the book is actually how it does define this and offers a new definition. And I'm very interested in how people find that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's what have been one of the questions that we directed to the book, because as you say, it's beyond South Africa, so it would always be, we wonder why is it titled and framed in that way, but you made it very clear and it's understandable. Yes, what I like about the book is not the just interdisciplinary, but also the transdisciplinary of the books. Like there is art, there is photography, there is art, there is poet, and I would like to know how also there's activism work, which is this is all, this is transdisciplinary. This is not just academics who are having this kind of discussions in their closed rooms, but it goes beyond that. And I would like to know like what was the like how would that go into the talk of publishing Africa, because publishing, we're really talking about academic publications, but how this kind of this transdisciplinary kind of engagement could help in somehow echoing the voices of Black feminist women in publishing. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I recently read an interview with Bibi Bakari Yusuf, who, as I mentioned, runs Cassava Republic Press. And I love that she founded this press in Nigeria and then set up a branch in London and or Oxford, wherever, in the UK, and takes African publishing into those spaces, ensuring that an African perspective is represented. And she speaks about, for the first time, publishing a travelogue and graphic novels. And so I think when you're attentive to what is happening in the literary sphere, in the artistic sphere, in the political sphere, you realize that the genres are having to keep up with the dynamism of people's actual practice. So when we again thought of whom to gather and to invite, we looked at what people were doing, the most interesting things that people were doing, also what our students were teaching us they were doing. And these were definitely encompassing practices far beyond the academic essay. I think academic publishing is a fraught area under great financial strain. And I think it's also a time of intellectual strain because in many cases, financial and other stresses encourage people to retrench and become more conservative and protective of their realm so that they can continue to survive. I think the answer to surviving and flourishing is in fact to be alert to these new dynamics. And so it was in fact a Black feminist commissioning editor at WITS who invited us to write this book, to edit this book, to bring it into existence. And I think I'm hoping it will be a magnificent success partly because of the quality of the writing in the book, and partly to endorse exciting, creative, visionary publishing in Africa. So it really is a reflection of whether the best and most interesting work is being done, in my view.
Thank you very much. I see some questions from Divine. If you would like to unmute and probably ask them directly, or
Thank you. As I thought that in writing I was already raising those in order just to remain as a technician, in the background. But my question relates to some of the issues that you have spoken to, and also which you raise. I think mainly that's in the introduction, and which is taken up by some of the other chapters, like around questions of knowledge production, making and unmaking the issues about omission and invisibility. And I'm just wondering whether this question of omission, because we are also doing a project around publishing, and I'm wondering whether this a focus on omission is because we have taken also this form of curating knowledge, of writing, of circulating knowledge even more seriously than we should, which is writing and publishing. And maybe if one were to decenter this form, one might make visible forms and also voices that are not visible, as you've demonstrated, through poetry and through many other forms. I think that's the first. Is it that we are taking this writing too seriously and this publishing too seriously, and probably marginalize publishing and writing so that we can also see other people are visible? And then the second is also relating to, and this is just me thinking as a nerd, that increasingly I see empowerment as a kind of circulation of a violent form that one needs to decenter. So one takes this thing that is a problem, and then we need to redistribute this thing to so many other people so that they can have access to it. So I'm just wondering whether what we should do is just to focus on ignoring this thing and decentering this thing, so we can have other people visible, rather than having to push that there must be, part of this form. I'm just playing here with ideas. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Divine. Before I became an academic, I was an itinerant writer for 3 years. I earned my living by giving poetry readings and moving to different places around the world, because residencies, came with certain benefits for a writer. So I understand what you mean in terms of the centering of the word, because I was living alongside dancers and composers and painters, and it was a very necessary chastening of my own assumption that the word was central in everything. And I also encountered spaces where the word had to take its place alongside theatre. So, for instance, poetry readings were also in the same spaces as acting and ballet and music. Of course, that combination of word and music, it seems quite natural to me. But I see what you mean in the centering of the word and simply the redistribution of what is in effect a problematic system. As an academic, I speak within that space, and your question to me now is quite a provocation. I would like to redistribute attention rather than that problematic structure. In that, I think if the word is feeling beleaguered by universities demanding that university presses make profit and be self-sustaining, and therefore causing a crimping in of the ambitions and the creativity of presses, that I think makes the problem worse. I am very much in favor of a not-for-profit enterprise which allows presses to be as creative and open-ended and open-minded as the actual practices of people. And that is what we did. And we had to make the argument with Wits Press, firstly of vastly expanding the number of people we wanted to include in the book. And then also, and these were good conversations, it's not that they were resistant, except to increasing the numbers eventually, infinitely. But to me, giving attention therefore also to music, also to theatre making, these will create a space of very productive and exciting for me, because I had never been in a word space that was so closely and effectively connected with other arts. I always, was in this narrow word space. I do absolutely see your point when it comes to academic publishing and the form of academic publishing. We unfortunately have adopted from the North this terrible practice of assessment, which means that we have narrowed our view of what counts as intellectual work. The North is beleaguered by having to administer the system, and we too have taken this on. And in some ways, because we are still busy practicing how to take it on, in some ways South Africa is actually more advanced in accepting creative writing as part of, say, its literary work. This is still something that the Northern Academy in some spaces struggles with. But so to me, it is more attention, more financial support, not the process of forcing a commercial model on intellectual production, and making possible the combination of arts, as we have done with photography and dance, etc., in this book. And at the same time, making it possible within academic spaces to value those combinations, to value even editing, which is, less valued, and yet without the work of doing editing, the gathering of voices into a powerful node of a book will not happen. The book also serves photography and other visual arts. So I think the future of the book is, if we allow it to continue along this path, a troubled one. You ask legitimately if we should defend the book so ardently because it is itself a manifestation of a troubling system. That is a provocation to me, and I will have to think more about it. But my answer at the moment is more, not less. More expansiveness, that is, not more focus on the book.
Yes, thank you very much. So Divine, do you have any response?
No, it was a provocation, and I think that Habiba has raised it because it's about what we do with power and how we think power. Because a lot of how we think about the margins and empowering the margins and everyone else who has an unequal relationship with power is to redistribute that thing that we already find problematic. And the consequence in the process is that we continue to maintain its own violence and the structure of it. And what we're doing is just redistributing. So it's just a provocation, I mean, to all of us. And as Habib has so rightly raised it, that it's a provocation that we have to think about seriously, because it's got implications, you know. It's got implications for so many things, whether you're talking about racial inequality, whether you're talking about gender equality, about feminist work, you know, about publishing. It's got lots of implications. So what do you do? What do we do with this center that we have taken so seriously? Whether it's in terms of knowledge, you know, the way universities are run. And as Habiba has so well articulated in the book with Desiree Lewis, you know, about how we omit people and why we are omitting people, because that's a question I'm asking. Why are some people omitted? Why are some voices omitted? And why do we keep turning to particular voices? And why is it that despite the work that so many women in this place do, and from this part of the world, and feminists do, why is it that they're not featuring? And perhaps it's not just the writing, it's also just this form that we've taken so seriously, and as the only way to have to make value, you know, to a contribution. And I think that's a provocation I'm pushing. Yeah. Sorry.
Very provocative. I think that's the other structures. I think this is a structure you drew our attention to. The other structures, which have to do with the importance of, the power of the Northern Academy and the way it manifests itself in our own imaginations. That is a profoundly important structure to bear in mind too. So I wonder if we were to change the form, if we would become more visible, given that structure. I think it needs intervention, and your provocation is is one intervention. It makes me anxious. So I really have to reflect on myself and what my crutches are, what I'm leaning on. Thank you, Divine.
Yes. So we have here in the chat, yes, Mahosana, I think, which is one of the authors. She has the article, because she said my essay on the orgasm self-pleasuring as an important aspect of women owning their bodies. And yeah, she's congratulating you for the book, and she's also she's apologizing that she can't talk live because of her voice. And yes, I mean, she's also also thanking you for being patient during the editing process. And we all know how editing processes could really be like a hassle.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
Rosie was busy putting together an award-winning book herself, so patience was required and very well rewarded.
Yeah. And there's also another comment from Anna. She's also thanking Divine for the provocation. And also she agrees with Habiba for your thorough, careful response. And she thinks it's important to have, she thinks it's important to think about the book and the written words as existing among the whole garment of collection and individual practices. As such, though, it is so important to make books like this excellent on to exist next to, amongst, in spite of all the other ones in the library and the bookstores and on pirate book websites. Yeah.
There's
Yes.
this beautiful quotation from a poet. Let me just read it for you. It's from Ladan Osman in her poem Silhouette. I see all the book spines there ever were, their colors and textures like women bent in prayer on a high holy day. My voice is small as it asks, what will it matter to them if I make a book? You know,
Mm.
when I read that, I understood so completely why the speaker in this poem feels, does it matter? Given all the millions of books, will it matter if my book exists? And I really am touched in my heart by Divine's question, and I will continue to think about it. But I also think, what are children carrying to school in their backpacks and in their hands is books. Which books are being assigned in primary school and high school? There are books. Books last for thousands of years. They, if we're lucky, if the quality is right. They certainly last longer than the electronic versions, the CDs and the stiffy disks and the floppy disks of my era. Uh, they mean something, their concreteness means something. The fact that you are in a book rather than outside a book means something. So at the same time as we are intervening in the ways in which books mean that some people will be silenced, we can also ensure that those books that continue to play their role in our education, in our centering of our culture, in our visibility, in representing our complex debates, that we contribute to those books, and that yes, it does matter if you make a book. I think, to answer that Ladan Osman's question.
Yes, we have questions, comments from Amina, and it will be nice, Amina, if you can, yes, ask directly.
Thank you, Azza. Thank you so much, Habiba, for bringing to life this book and for the discussion today. I loved reading the introduction, and I really look forward to reading the remaining of the book. And I've been thinking about the feminist archive and what could the feminist archive look like. And in the book you mentioned New Daughters of Africa by Margaret Busby as like a reference point to thinking about broader African narratives that are not contained within geographic boundaries. And I think your anthology is also a feminist archive, a contemporary one that we will refer back to today and tomorrow. And yeah, I think I've just enjoyed listening to the provocation Divine brought forward and to your response. And I would love it if you could perhaps elaborate on your take on the future feminist archive, the one we should be working on today. If it's radical, in what ways should it be radical? Where should it exist? Who should it not include? Yeah, I think these are the things thoughts that I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Amina, what a fantastically difficult question. This book surfacing is indeed an attempted archiving, a gathering of voices that crosses generations, which is important, and that deals with everything from transnational political solidarity to the future of farming, and to what it is like to publish when you're a Black woman, and also the debates and differences and contentions among feminists. This also is something to bring to bear. We should archive also our differences, our varying views and our practices of disagreeing with one another. So this is an archive that is expansively envisioned it is a book, but it speaks about and writes in the form of poetry. It speaks and includes the form of photography. It includes really beautiful work on dance, and it tells us through Pumlaqola what it is like to stand in front of an artwork that enters your body. That kind of writing as well, because when we stand in front of an artwork, it's not necessarily that we know what it's supposed to do or we know how to articulate what it does to us. So this is also a reading that is a teaching. And so it is a book that sees the archive as necessarily very embracing. And that is something I think that we have learned directly from our exclusion. I love the story that Kozi Gabeba documents in her book, Our Words, Our Worlds. And that is the story of the exclusion of women from the mainstream of poetry, academic recognition, and publication, writing workshops. And it is both a publication by mainstream publishers as well as alternative publishers. Women were on the background. And what happened was a creation of a new infrastructure that became more successful than either the mainstream publishers or the alternative ones. So it's exactly from the experience of being excluded comes not only a desire for what exists and to repeat what exists, but actually the idea of creating something entirely different that happens to provide childcare and that nurtures in a long-term way the creation of new poetry. And I think that the success of feminist poetry in the 20 years leading up to Kozi's book publication in 2019 helped to embed a feminist consciousness in a broader South African public. I really think it is that powerful. So how to archive this means again to be attentive to the practices that may not be very visible. And what Our Words, Our Worlds did was precisely to make visible those practices, those new forms, and that new infrastructure as well as its effects. And of course, one example that all of you will be familiar with is that when students were protesting in 2015 and 16, they held poetry on their placards. And why is this? Because a placard can hold only so many words, and those words have to do work. And poetry is a work of extreme labor, of emotional and political labor. And that is what the students were articulating. And what a future archive might look like, I think, has to be as attentive and as creative as this. What it should not include, I think that is a difficult question. The obvious answers to this, of course, but should we exclude? What are the lines? I think this is a larger debate, and we will exclude, but are there organized principles upon which we should? That again is also a provocation to me. I'm, without being a Pollyanna about this, I usually have an orientation toward expansiveness. But clearly, the archive, which is restoring an absence, cannot simply be infinitely expansive. So on what grounds do we draw our boundaries? That's a brilliant question. I don't know the full answer to that. Yes, let me end with I don't know. sometimes it's good.
Thank you very much. Amina, are you satisfied?
Yes, because it is something I think it's a collective, I think it's a collective exercise that we need to do together to think about. Yeah. Thank you so much. No, I love the answer still.
My pleasure. And obviously, the archive of what counts as global Black feminism is, we argue, limited, and so it is a necessary beginning of a conversation which restores some of the erasures in that archive.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also have another kind of, inquiry or question, because it's back to the title of the book. When you talk about, it's not. When you read the book, you see it's actually beyond Black feminist, but Black feminist is actually about intersectionality. So why did you in the title just put it in the frame of feminist, probably, but not intersectional, some sort of words or concepts that could reflect the intersectionality of the book itself? Why is it limited to Black feminists?
Well, this is a title that the first part of the title, surfacing, was something that Desiree envisioned, and it was perfect for what we were doing, in that surfacing has so many dimensions. And I think one of the first texts I read as a student in a feminist class was Margaret Atwood's Surfacing. So that also brought back my own archive and the beginning of my official training, in academic feminism. But your question about why highlight feminist, it's legitimate because within the book, in Zeytu Matabene's contribution, for instance, we see many practices that are overtly about female liberation and about an archive, and that didn't need the word feminist. So for us, claiming a relation to that word, which has been exclusionary in the past, is important. At the same time as any use of that word has to have a necessary humility in understanding that practices preceded the word. And so the word has to have a modesty in understanding that there are people who have ardently and fervently advanced women's liberation without needing that word. As to intersectionality, I think you're right that the book practices this very deeply. One of the contributions I'm very proud of is the way that we start off by mapping the exclusions of our anti-apartheid struggle, which was largely inattentive to issues of sexuality, and certainly placed gender to the side. So writing back into those spaces, which is perhaps the foundational political struggle of our contemporary period, writing back its absences, and then juxtaposing Mary Hames and Gertrude Fester Wickham's contributions with Barbara Boswell's contribution, which speaks about her relation to students during the Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall protests, and seeing how in those protests issues of gender and sexuality were raised to the same level of importance. So the same level of importance as the primary struggle of those protests. So it's clear then that the book practices this kind of multiplicity. We didn't want to only use the word intersectionality because I think that it also is a term that needs humility, in the sense that the practices that it's describing long precede the use of the term. And so I think instead of using that word to demonstrate our attentiveness, we used feminism in order to show that feminism must be attentive to the multiplicity of struggles that feminists engage in, and to also make that word feminist and feminism a complex one, not a panacea, but also one that we lay claim to. I remember this kind of debate also in the 1990s. What should we call ourselves? And should we call ourselves womanists? Should we call ourselves various other possibilities? And we chose Black feminism, and I think that was an important choice then, and I'm still I'm still happy with that choice now. And speaking of the 1990s, both Desiree and I are of a certain generation, and she is, as you beautifully put, her works exceed her name. That's a gorgeous introduction of Desiree as a profoundly important intellectual, and we both come from that particular era, and there may be entirely new directions and new definitions and new decisions now, which is why this book cannot speak for all feminists and cannot speak for all time. It is a one intervention at a particular time with a particular range of authors, and many more need to come so that it can effectively represent what is actually a very complex and shifting field.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
There was also the other point that was unique about this book is its inclusion of religion
mhm.
in several of the texts, and not religion, as an afterthought and let's include religion, but religion because South African feminists have made remarkable contributions to global debates about feminism and religion. For instance, Sadia Sheikh is cited all over the world by progressive Muslims and scholars of religion, feminist scholars of religion, for her article, A Tafsir of Praxis. And this article she alludes to in her work, and this has made possible attention to the lived realities of women, especially non-elite women, in helping to read and interpret important texts of Islamic practice. Fatima Sidat writes about what it is like when feminists neglect religion. When we don't pay attention to religion, it's not that we are better secular feminists. It is that we inherit the patriarchal version of religion, right? Because we have not done anything about that. So whatever circulates in our culture is what feminists attend to as well. And so she speaks about an important march on parliament by women, and that was led by feminists. And when the protesters arrived at parliament, a prayer was said, and the person who opened the prayer opened with God the Father. So that is what happens when feminists neglect religion. We inherit the patriarchal version, and what happens when we can re-envision the gender of divinity, right? A profound question. Gertrude Fester Wickham speaks about herself as a lesbian feminist and a Christian. And she writes into the archives of the anti-apartheid struggle as an important figure and a legendary figure within that struggle. She writes back into it religion, sexuality, and ensures that we can't speak anymore about that era without attending to its silences including gender and sexuality, and also the role that religion played. To write about this critically, to write about this analytically and thoughtfully, I think is one of the pleasures that this book has, intellectual pleasure. Also read Jackie Job's essay, which is magnificent on a number of dimensions. I knew that she's a dancer, and I thought, how dare she be a dancer and also write with this level of quality? You know, it's a stupendously good essay. And she also speaks about the way in which religion shapes the possibility of working class women's lives, and therefore how to find avenues of greater possibility without denying or rejecting religion, but how to find avenues of possibility from within that reality, and how sometimes you can move outside of that reality, and sometimes you can move both inside and out. So that's another part that I'm extremely proud of. That the gathering of people includes those who take religion seriously as feminists.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we exceeded the time of the seminar, but yeah, we have Ralph who was leaving, but he was thanking you very much for the presentation and for the participant. So if there's any other question, any other remark, otherwise we will close the session, and we will thank you very much, Habiba, for your presentation and for your talk. And we really, you know, you like now our curiosity is even like more extending to read to read the rest of the book, and to also yeah, to see like how this I mean it's framed feminist, and of course South Africa, Black South Africa, but there is, I see there's a lot of especially if we look at the work of Sarah Bikele. She also wrote about sexuality and religion, so it will be nice to, you know, like she's from she's like a feminist scholar from Ethiopia, so it will be really nice to, yeah, look at the new voices, as you said, or the new generations of like who are writing also more including more the intersectional kind of approaches to yeah. Thank you very much, and yeah, we are so glad, and we invite everyone for our next seminars. And yeah, you will just go to our webpage and you will see all the advertisements, and we hope to have you there. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, a rich discussion for me, full of provocations. It's excellent when one has to say, I don't know, and I have to think more about that. It means that this question has never been asked before. And I find this such an excellent venue. So I thank you for inviting us, and I hope there will be more of an opportunity for Desiree as well to speak with you.
Yes. Yeah, we also hope so too. Yeah.
Participate.
Okay. So.